Hello and welcome to my mastery guide / tier list for May 2024. The reason I'm telling you when I'm recording is because there are occasional updates to masteries, such as the release of mastery loadouts a few weeks ago, and also there is a potential for new mastery points to become available, such as the one from completion of the Necropolis. However, the masteries themselves have essentially remained unchanged for the last 8 or 9 years. And so this video will give you a good idea into how valuable each mastery is, and more importantly, what to prioritize. I'm going to go over every single mastery in the game. So a lot of other content creators will show you their setup and like what they run for, Battlegrounds or Alliance War, whatever, which is fine, and I can do that right now. I have no problem sharing my mastery setups, but this doesn't really fully explain how I got to this point, which masteries I put on first, which ones I put on second, which masteries were the finishing touches. So this video will be more of a tier list than a guide. I will attempt to categorize every single mastery in the game by importance, so you guys fully understand what to prioritize when building the setup that's right for you. Of course, this tier list is entirely my opinion, and you're welcome to disagree with me in the comments, but I'll try my best to be as objective as possible. At the end of the day, I can only share what I know based on my experience. Also, I'm thinking of doing mastery guides for every Battleground season. Depending on the meta, there are some masteries that are worth running when they normally wouldn't be, and on the other hand, there are some masteries that lose a lot of value just because of one node and therefore aren't worth running. So if you want to see my mastery guides for each Battlegrounds meta, starting with Season 18, Weeks 1 to 2, make sure to hit the like button and consider subscribing. Okay, let's get into it. So we're going to be starting off with one of the smallest tiers, and this is the Staples tier. These are the masteries that you need to actually function in a fight, and they're so important that you learn about them as part of the tutorial. There's only 3 masteries, and they're of course Parry, Dexterity, and Limber. So parrying and dexing, they're 2 of the things that you do in every single fight. Whenever you're not directly striking the opponent, a lot of the time you're going to be parrying or dexing in order to get your next combo or special attack in. There are very, very special situations, usually in high tier Alliance War, where some fights are better countered with no points in the parry mastery, such as certain champions against Stunning Reflection, which is a node that punishes parrying. However, for 99.99% of the game, parry is essential. Limber is also in this tier because it's actually needed. You do need 1 point in Limber to unlock the Dexterity mastery. And so that's the staples. You got 3 points in parry, you got 1 point in Limber, and 1 point in Dexterity. That is beyond essential for any mastery setup. Alright guys, the next tier we have is actually the smallest tier. There are only 2 masteries here, and this tier is just targeted at early game players. For the purpose of this video, I'm defining early game players as anyone who is not at level 60, which is the max level. Because the bulk of your mastery points will be accessible through leveling up, but not only that, you also access more stuff in the game as you level up. So getting to level 60 ASAP is very important. So of course the 2 masteries I'm talking about are Wisdom and Intelligence. So it only costs 1 gold to get 1 point in Wisdom. Sorry, it only costs gold to get 1 point in Wisdom, which is what I recommend. I only recommend 1 point. The second and third points, they're not really worth it. Intelligence is the one I recommend maxing out, because it does cost 1 Stony Core, but it does, and it costs some units as well to level it up. But it is super worth it because you can get up to 20% extra XP across the entire game, and it will just make the leveling up process so much easier. Of course, once you level 60, you can ignore this mastery completely because by then you're no longer an early game player. And you can see that I've never unlocked this mastery because I was an idiot when I was an early game player. So try to learn from my mistakes. But that's the early game tier. So next up we have is the Essentials tier. Now I know what you're thinking. You got Staples, we got Essentials. They're 2 very similar descriptions, and that's true. But I'll explain it like this: the Staples that I mentioned, Parry and Dex, they're integral to the actual function of your champions in the fights, so you don't get obliterated by everything you touch. But this next tier, the Essentials, they're masteries that you can technically play without. Like if you're playing with 3 mastery points, you just started the game. But they're called Essentials because they are essential to any good mastery build. If you don't include one of these Essentials, you better have a very good reason. So these masteries are ones that I highly recommend investing in early game as you level up. So we'll start in the offense tree, and we're going to start with 5 Essentials here. So we've got Strength, we've got Greater Strength, we've got Pierce, we've got Lesser Precision, and we've got Lesser Cruelty. 1 point in each. Now this is the start of the offense tree, so you can't really avoid these ones, and so they are essential to any good mastery setup. So strength and greater strength. Strength will give you an extra 6 attack, and greater strength will give you an extra 1.6% attack. Pierce will let you ignore an additional 5% armor and resistances on critical hits. And then lesser precision will give you an extra 25 crit rating, and lesser cruelty will give you an extra 30 crit damage rating. So they're not very good masteries on their own, and that's why we only put 1 point in each, but they are necessary to unlock the much stronger offensive masteries. Speaking of, the next essential masteries are precision and cruelty. Now, unlike the previous ones I mentioned, precision and cruelty are amazing. You will notice a night and day difference in not only the frequency of your critical hits, but also the damage from your critical hits. So 5 points in precision gets you an extra 425 crit rating, which is very nice. The actual chance to crit is different for each champion, and crit rating as it scales up has diminishing returns. So the actual difference is not the same for everyone. But I'll just say that plus 425 all the time is very good. And it's the same for cruelty. Plus 475 crit damage rating is amazing. Makes your crits hit so much harder. And so these two masteries in particular are the ones that I suggest getting ASAP when you're starting out in the game. Your DPS will go through the roof once you have these unlocked. Alright, onto defense. So the main essential we are targeting here is Willpower. In my opinion, Willpower is the best mastery in the game, if you don't count Parry and Dex, because they're staples. Now, Willpower is something that has saved my butt and thousands of other players' butts by giving their champions a way to heal when they have debuffs. That's the way it works. For each new type of debuff your champions suffer, they passively regenerate 0.5% of their health per second and also gain a bit of extra armor. It doesn't affect robots, but it affects 95% of the champions in the game. So there are countless situations where Willpower has a use. It helps you maintain high health for Battlegrounds and Alliance War. It makes your defenders take more time to kill. It's great for solo content as well, like Act 8, Eternity of Pain, Abyss, Necropolis, you name it. Debuffs appear everywhere in the game, and so being able to heal from them is a game changer. I recommend just 1 point in Willpower for standard setups, as the next 2 points, you can see they don't really make too much of a difference. You see the second point gives you 0.6% regen, and the third point gives you 0.7% regen. So they don't really give you bang for buck. So Willpower, best mastery in the game. But you can't just unlock it straight away. You actually need, as you can see here, 15 points in defense. And so a lot of the early defensive tree are essential masteries as a result. So we've got 1 point in Vitality. We've got 1 point in Greater Vitality and 1 point in Salve. The Vitality masteries give you a bit of extra health. You know, Vitality gives you 24 extra health, which is nothing. Greater Vitality, extra 1.6% health, also nothing. And Salve gives you 1 health twice per second, also nothing. So that's bad. But what's good is the mastery that Salve unlocks, which is Recovery. So Recovery will increase any health your champion recovers during a fight from buffs or passive regen by 15%. So not only from Willpower, but any regen buffs or passives your champions have. Definitely recommend 3 in Recovery all the time. And then actually for the Essentials tier, I also recommend at least 1 point in all of these, all but one of these other ones. So what we've got, Energy Resistance, increase, we'll start Physical Resistance. Yeah, Physical Resistance, obviously physical attacks and damage over time, like Rupture. And then we've got Energy Resistance for energy champions. There's a lot of champions that have just pure energy damage, but also damage over time, like Shock, Incinerate, Cold Snap. Then we also have Block Proficiency. This will decrease the damage you take on blocked hits. And then also Perfect Block Chance, which does what it says. It increases your chance for a perfect block. And this also actually slightly increases your parry stun duration. If we look at the parry mastery, stun duration increases by up to 1 second with perfect block chance. So having the perfect block mastery can slightly increase your stun durations. So with this, we have 10 points in the defense tree. Obviously, you need 15 to unlock Willpower, and so you can do what you want with the remaining 5 points. Whether you want more block proficiency, or you might want more energy resistance, or you might want more health. It's really up to you. But the last essential mastery is in the proficiencies tree, and it's 3 points in the Stupefy mastery. Parry is obviously one of the best masteries in the game, but on its own, the stuns actually don't last that long, especially against opponents with Limber. And so 3 out of 3 Stupefy is a way to get your stuns to last a much more comfortable duration. I've had this 3 out of 3 for the last 8 years, and it's never going to change. Alright, the next tier is a tier full of very, very good masteries. These are some of the best masteries in the game. Now, they're not in the Essentials tier for a few reasons, but mostly because the Essentials are ones you should be prioritizing first. Some of these recommended masteries are very expensive to unlock, and others only affect certain champions. But despite that, are super powerful and can seriously influence a fight. Now, the first one I want to talk about is Despair. Despair is, in my opinion, just behind Willpower as the best mastery in the game. There are heaps of times in this game where you will encounter champions that can regen, either through their abilities or through certain nodes or through Willpower. Now, Despair helps you cut down that regen significantly. If you have 3 out of 3 Despair, which is what I recommend, you can cut the regen down to 0 if you have at least 7 debuffs. With some champions, you can actually not only just cut the regen down to 0, but you can start reversing it with other abilities like Petrify. And there are dozens of champions that can have 7 debuffs on the opponent at any one time. Dozens. I'm showing you the best champions here that synergize with the Despair Mastery, and it is mostly Science champions, because typically Science champions are the ones that have the easiest access to debuffs. However, there are plenty of champions from other classes that can also benefit from the Despair Mastery significantly. Now, as a bonus, it helps on defense. The people fighting your champions will usually have the Willpower Mastery active, so you can reduce the regen they get from Willpower through Despair. Now, the next highly recommended mastery is Deep Wounds. This follows on directly from Despair, as you can see, it follows on right there. And like Despair, is not a mastery that benefits everyone, but my goodness, the champions it does benefit, it benefits greatly. I personally recommend 5 out of 5, but how much you want to invest is up to you, because it is a very expensive mastery, and you don't want to invest until you have a pretty strong bleed roster. But it just makes so many champs that much better. I run this mastery way more often than I don't, and it's in this tier just because it's so powerful and well worth the investment. If you're unsure when you should invest, it's a tricky question for sure, because it's specific to your roster. But at some point, you definitely, at the very least, should consider it. If you're unsure about if you should invest in Deep Wounds, leave a comment or try and find a way to message me. I'll be happy to help. Up next is Limber, 5 out of 5. That's right, Limber is in 2 different tiers. However, in the Staples tier, it's just 1 point because that's the bare bones you need. But in this tier, I recommend 5 points, mostly for Battlegrounds defense and also Alliance War defense. If you're not a massive player of either, you can probably leave it just at 1 out of 5, but it makes a massive difference to your defender's stun duration. It's very cheap, and it will cause a lot more mistakes for your opponents than if you just have 1 out of 5. Now, it can also help you offensively if you accidentally find yourself getting stunned from a special 3 or a node, like encroaching stun. Having 5 out of 5 Limber can help you recover super quickly. Now, next is Stand Your Ground, 5 out of 5. So in the Essentials tier, I mentioned that the Essentials and defense will give you 10 points. As you can see here, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? But you need 15 to unlock Willpower. So I personally recommend investing the last 5 points here and Stand Your Ground. So like Limber, this will make your defenders tougher to fight, as a lot of heavies will up to 50% of heavies will not be able to break your defender's block. And then on the flip side, if you accidentally get caught by a heavy attack, Stand Your Ground can really save your bacon. It's certainly saved my bacon on many different occasions. I think this is a much better way to get your last 5 points rather than a tiny bit of extra block proficiency or energy resistance or health. This is a much better way to get it. Now finally, we have the first class mastery that I'll cover today, and that is of course Mystic Dispersion, or MD as most people call it. So I almost put this in Essentials, but because of the associated costs, I did put it in the highly recommended tier. And despite it being extremely powerful, so much that I'm pretty sure it actually got nerfed several years ago, it's not quite as essential as the ones in that tier. However, it is a mastery that I recommend investing in when you can. This will take your Mystic champs to a whole new level, giving you 12% of your max power, not bar power, your max power, whenever a buff on your opponent expires. Against certain cosmic champs or even other class champs and nodes, this turns into some absolutely insane power gain. It's so integral to the Mystic class that there are some champions like Man-Thing and Symbiote Supreme that almost need this mastery to be the champions that they are. Without this mastery, they're pretty average, but with it, they become much stronger. This has tons of uses offensively, but defensively also. This is a mastery that has been the cause of thousands of deaths across Alliance War and Battlegrounds, because Even the expiry of the precision buff from dexterity will trigger this power gain. So without the right power controlling champions or the right playstyle, this can spell a whole lot of trouble for your opponent on defense. This is a mastery I run pretty much 100% of the time in Battlegrounds and for Alliance War defense because I usually have at least 1 or 2 Mystic Defenders. But that concludes the highly recommended masteries. Alright guys, the next tier I call the nice to have masteries. The last tier I went over, the highly recommended tier, are masteries that I personally run almost all of the time. They're that good. But this next tier has a lot of good masteries as well, and I usually run a few of them depending on the situation, but they're not as powerful as the last tier, and so I wouldn't prioritize any of these over the highly recommended masteries for any other reason apart from cost. Because these masteries are definitely cheaper than the last tier, and you don't typically run these ones all the time, but some people do. There are some people that definitely like certain masteries in this tier a lot, but again, they're not as powerful, so they're in the nice to have tier. So these are the ones that I'll typically sprinkle my last 4 or 5 points in when making a build. So first up we have Assassins. This is typically a mastery where if I have 1 extra point lying around, I'll typically put it here. It comes right after Deep Wounds, so it's it's easy to just slap 1 point there, job done. Now I don't recommend investing past 1 point. I have because I've used 5 out of 5 Assassins for big Abyss and Necropolis runs, but apart from that, 1 is plenty. It's also the most bang for your buck because a 1 point gives you, as you can see, 20% attack when your opponent is below 18% health, and also you get 12% ability accuracy reduction. However, each extra point, it's still the same health, 18% threshold, but the attack increases only by 10%, and the ability accuracy reduction increases by only 2%. So it's definitely the most bang for your buck just with 1 point. But it is great for just finishing Battlegrounds fights, Alliance War fights, and of course, big bosses that have a lot of health. So next up is Petrify and Pacify. Now these kind of go hand in hand because they're right next to each other and they're also quite similar. So Petrify is great because it reduces regen on top of Despair, and it also reduces power gain. But it's only when the defender is stunned, so it isn't a constant thing like Despair. But it is nice to have if you have a few spare points. Now Pacify is a bit more specific. For example, when Magneto got buffed, he was the meta champion. A lot of people were running 3 out of 3 Pacify, so he could go from 70% ability accuracy reduction to 100%. And a lot of people did the same with Blade, because Blade didn't have full ability accuracy reduction. But a lot of the time you see champions these days, they come out and they usually are able to get to full ability accuracy reduction themselves. And again, it's only when the defender is stunned, so it's not constant. It's not a constant thing. But the good news is that both of these masteries do scale linearly, so you can see you get the same. You get the same with the first point as you do the second and the third point. But yeah, I usually don't run these masteries because of the stun factor, but they are nice to have for certain situations. All right, next I want to talk about Courage. So this mastery has probably saved my butt more than I know because you get a pretty nice damage boost whenever you're below 50%. And I don't need to tell you how often I've been below 50% health, but it's a lot. Now, you get the most value from 1 point in Courage. The next 2 points are only half as effective. You can see you start with 10% attack, and then the next ones only give an extra 5%. But this is a very cheap way to get some extra damage, and it can potentially save you in an Alliance War fight, or maybe save a revive on a big story boss, or a big, Eternity of Pain boss, who knows. And it's got no Mastery Core cost associated, so you can get it whenever you want. But the next one is Glass Cannon. I don't typically run this one, but I have run it a lot in the past. It is really nice, a cheap way to get a permanent damage boost. However, it does give your champs less health too. So when planning a Battlegrounds mastery setup, I try to avoid this mastery because 2.4% less defender health is a lot more than normal, because your defenders have 4 times health there. But that being said, 1 point won't make a massive impact. However, I wouldn't recommend investing more than 1 point. But you can do 2 or 3 for big solo content like Abyss, Necropolis, Gauntlet, Eternity of Pain, stuff like that. So we've got 2 more masteries in this tier to cover. The first one, well, they're both in the defensive tier. The first one here is Inequity. So Inequity, this is an awesome way to passively reduce your opponent's attack when they have debuffs on them, up to a maximum of 36% attack reduction, which is quite a lot. Now, it is quite pricey. It costs 4 card cores to unlock all 3 points, but this will slow down your opponents a lot in Battlegrounds if they're fighting defenders that will have access to debuffs. It's in the nice to have tier because it's not something I would prioritize over anything in the previous tier. This is a mastery that you should I probably wouldn't touch until you start to become more competitive in Alliance War and Battlegrounds. You're in the first, maybe the top 5 tiers of Alliance War, or you're constantly hitting the Gladiator circuit in Battlegrounds, stuff like that. And then the last mastery I'll put in the nice to have tier is Resonate. Now this is a mastery that only needs 1 point because the next 2 suffer a very serious drop off. You can see 16% for the 16% chance at 1 point, but after that it's only 17% chance, then 18% chance. And the weakness is a bit stronger as well, but it's really not worth going past 1 point. It's probably the biggest drop off out of any mastery in the game. But this is a great way to access additional debuffs. Perhaps if you're fighting a champion with Diss Track, where you need 3 debuffs to do any damage. It can also stack with the Despair Mastery and give you extra regen reduction. However, I rarely run this mastery in Battlegrounds, and that's because the attack reduction is only 7%. Stacking with Inequity, this can get it to 13%, but it does mean that it's a free debuff for the opponent to heal from with Willpower. It does have its uses though, so definitely worth having in your back pocket. Alright guys, so I just went over the nice to have tier. These are the masteries that I have, and I usually run 1 or 2 of them depending on what I want to achieve. Now these next masteries are what I call the situational tier. I only turn these masteries on for very specific situations. They're not completely useless, which is why they're in this tier and not the next one. But I don't think I have any of these in my mastery loadouts. I don't think. I have one of them in one loadout, I think. Yeah, I have one of them in one loadout. That's it. So they're definitely worth investing in, but only if you know exactly what you're going to be using them for. I wouldn't just slap any remaining points you have onto these ones. I put your last few points in the nice to have masteries. So the first one we'll talk about is Coagulate. In the right situation, this can be a very powerful mastery because you can reduce your opponent's combat power rate by up to 18% with 5 points. Now, obviously, I personally am a big Punisher 2099 fan, and yes, he is the best champion for this mastery, but just because I'm a big Punisher 2099 fan, that doesn't mean I'm going to put Coagulate in the Essentials tier, because that would be stupid. But for example, in Battleground seasons where tech attackers or tech defenders are the meta, this can be a nice mastery to have available, as it can reduce the defender's combat power rate by a nice percentage, and can also reduce the attacker's combat power rate should you place a tech defender. So it can screw with some champions rotations. But this doesn't benefit every single tech attacker. There's quite a few there's a few that arguably get worse when this mastery is on. But for the majority of the tech class, this is quite a nice mastery, but admittedly it is situational. But continuing on with the class theme, the next up is Science Serum. This can give your science champions up to 960 energy resistance, which is really nice, especially considering a large percentage of the Mystic class, which is what science champions have class advantage over. A large percentage of that class do have a lot of energy-based attacks. It can help you reduce, so this mastery can help you reduce damage from shocks, incinerates, cold snaps, limbo damage, neuroshocks. So it can be worth running in a science flavored meta. And there's not really any science champions that don't benefit from this. Similar to Coagulate, it doesn't have a super common use, but that's why it belongs in this tier. Now the last class mastery I'll put in this tier is Mutagenesis. So I was very close to putting this in the tier after this, but I gave it some thought, and there are still, I guess, a couple situations where this can be used. If you're running these recoil masteries and you're using a lot of mutants, this can help the bleed from double edge, which normally lasts for 8 seconds. It can help it last, up to 2.5 seconds faster, which is good. It can help for biohazard, the very occasional Battlegrounds meta, like a hazard shift that has bleed associated with it. But to be honest, there are a lot of really good mutants that are actually worse with this mastery. Anyone who's a Horseman of Apocalypse is straight up immune to any bleed damage. And there's also champions like Onslaught, Omega Red, Sauron, Magneto, Mr. Sinister, who have super high resistances to bleed damage. And then also there's just straight up bleed immune mutants like Dust, Iceman, Magneto House of X. So this mastery can maybe be used somewhere for some mutants. I've personally never used it, and probably never will. But I guess it's not completely useless. But next up we have is Coagulate and Suture. Now these two kind of go hand in hand. These masteries are definitely better than Mutagenesis because they benefit all champions, not just mutants. Now these masteries are typically ones you run with the recoil masteries, which are the ones that put bleeds on you. I'm going to be doing a whole separate video on the recoil masteries because they deserve their own video, to be honest. But without recoils, I wouldn't really recommend running these masteries, unless it is a very bleed-focused Battlegrounds or Alliance War meta. Out of the two, your Coagulate, so Coagulate basically makes you take up to 30% less bleed damage, or bleed passives, and then Suture reduces the duration of enemy bleed effects. As you can see, I haven't unlocked Suture yet, but I have unlocked Coagulate. So because I think Coagulate is the better one to invest in, as it affects all bleeds, even permanent bleeds. Whereas Suture, it only affects the duration of bleeds. It doesn't reduce the damage per second. Now the next two I have in this tier are Extended Fury and Enhanced Fury. Now you can tell straight away that these masteries, they're not really anything special whatsoever. Extended Fury, it can make your Fury buffs last up to 0.8 seconds longer, which is maybe 1 or 2 hits. And then Enhanced Fury makes your Fury buffs up to 8% more potent. In no world is that worth all the mastery points you need to invest in them, because that's 8 mastery points. There's no way that's worth it. The only time I've run these masteries is when I've done really big, high boosted Abyss and Acropolis runs with Aegon. Outside of that, I'd never use these masteries. You can get a lot more with your points than from the masteries I mentioned in previous tiers. Now finally, the last mastery in the situational tier is Unfazed. This is an extremely expensive mastery. To unlock all 5 points, it costs about 4,000 units. And that will give you up to a 55% chance to go unstoppable for 1 second and get a bit of extra damage for your next crit when the opponent evades. Now this was a mastery that a lot of people ran back in the day to combat champions like Mr. Negative and Quake. These days you don't really see it being run too often, so I almost put it in the useless tier. But sometimes it's okay to put 1 point in Unfazed to catch some unwary opponents in Battlegrounds or Alliance War if they're using evade-based champs against your defenders. Sometimes maybe. But if you do that, I wouldn't put any more than 1 point in Unfazed. I don't recommend trying to use this, and I don't recommend trying to use this mastery as a way to counter evade offensively. Because since this mastery was created, we've had True Strike, we've had straight up, anti-evade with champions like Ghost and Strife, and also we've had the introduction of slow debuffs now, and also Decelerate, which also reduces evade ability accuracy. Evade is not the issue that it was back in 2015, 2016, so you can tell this mastery is severely outdated, but it sometimes is okay to maybe run 1 point here, but don't expect too much from it. Alright guys, so almost at the end of the video, we're on to the last tier now, which is of course the useless tier. These masteries have absolutely no value and should not even be looked at, but I will discuss them so you know what they all are and why they're in this tier. Now the first two are Pittance and Prosperity. You can tell they're bad because I haven't even unlocked them. So Pittance can give you up to 3 extra gold with all gold rewards, and Prosperity can give you a whole extra 2% gold with all of your gold rewards. Yeah, they're both terrible. Of course, more gold is good, but this is not the way to get it, especially because just to unlock all the points in these two masteries, it costs 9 Stony Cores, which is over 1,200 units. 1,200 units to get an extra 2% gold. That is not stonks. Now next is the 5th class mastery I'm covering today, and that is Cosmic Awareness, which lets you reduce the potency of opponents' armor up buffs by up to 40% with 5 points. Now if this was armor rating in general, I might have put this mastery in situational, but no, this is only armor up buffs, which is terrible. Of course less armor is good, but this is not the way to remove it. Nullification, you got Neutralize, or just straight up armor break is how you deal with armor up buffs, not this mastery. And the final class mastery to cover is Pure Skill. This will let you ignore up to 64% armor and resistances on critical hits. That might sound like a lot, but I'll save you the trouble of experimenting for yourself and tell you that it is not worth it whatsoever. Firstly, this mastery only affects critical hits, which in their nature ignore most resistances and armor. And also, a lot of the best skill champions in this game don't rely on crits for damage. Some of them do, Mantis, Shang-Chi, Mole Man. But a lot of the best ones rely on damage over time. This mastery affects a very tiny percentage of the skill class, and it benefits them only a tiny bit. Useless. Now, finally, we'll finish with the clown wheel of masteries, and that is the Scouter Lens and Detection masteries. So these will let you reveal the hero rating and, more importantly, the star rating of enemies up to 1 step away on a quest map, which you can boost to 3 steps with more points. And then, with the right detection mastery, you can reveal the champion's hidden class and share that information with your alliance. Yeah, so these masteries, as you can tell from the tone of my voice, are just a straight up joke. They were somewhat relevant about 8 to 9 years ago, before Alliance War seasons even begun. And that's a long time ago, because we're on Alliance War season 49 now. Because back then, most of the war defenders were hidden. Could you imagine if we had hidden war defenders now? Bloody hell. Yeah, they got rid of that pretty quick. And now these masteries just sit here, just gathering dust. Alright guys, so before I end the video, I do want to talk a little bit about the recoil masteries. I do want to mention them. I didn't cover them today because they really do deserve their own video, so that will be coming shortly. Stay tuned for that. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. If you're not subscribed and consider subscribing, I really appreciate that. I think I will start to do full Battlegrounds season previews covering the best attackers, defenders, and of course the best masteries. So keep an eye out for those ones. But yeah. That's going to do it for me today, guys. Hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.